Still important to enjoy foods that you enjoy, but to be smart about it. You've probably seen it in my videos with my older setup, but I'm not particularly skinny. In fact, I'm a pretty heavy guy. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. My face probably shows it enough. But yeah, I've gone back and forth with weight over the years. I think I've mentioned that between a doctor's visit in January, the one about the ringing in my ear, and then a previously scheduled follow-up in March showed that I gained about 7 pounds in about 6 weeks. As I record this today, I actually bought some protein pasta to phase out regular old pasta. Yes, it's going to be 2 to 3 times the price, depending on whether the regular pasta is on sale or not. Sometimes it's on sale for 99 cents from $1.49. And there's no store brand equivalent of protein pasta, but you know what? I decided I may as well focus on having something that's a little healthier. Yes, it's double to triple the price, but in the grand scheme of things, it'll be worth it. And I also have a serving of. God, I just realized I should have made vegetables to go with my protein bar for today's lunch, but we're not here to talk about my personal eating habits. I'm here to talk about this article from The Atlantic titled Weight Loss Drugs Aren't Really About Weight by David Kessler. For context, to get this out of the way, I am not a doctor. Talk to your doctor about any sort of prescription drugs. If you trust your doctor's judgment and they think Ozempic is useful for something, then by all means, that listen to your doctor on that, not me. Personally, when it comes to the weight thing, all I'm gonna say is eat less, find healthier alternatives where you can, like I did with switching from pasta to protein pasta, so that I'm not eating too many carbs. Now, this way, I'm reducing it to just the sandwich bun that I make for my chicken sandwiches, and my tri-weekly pizza, which is 3 pizzas a week. I get so confused sometimes on whether bi or tri-weekly means 2 or 3 times a week or once every 2 to 3 weeks. So, yeah, you know my habits. Let's get into the article. Ever since the pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk realized that GLP-1 drugs were useful for more than diabetes, doctors and researchers have struggled to answer a deceptively simple question: who should be taking them? The medications are highly effective at inducing weight loss, and most Americans are overweight or have obesity. Guilty, Your Honor. But GLP-1s are also expensive, not covered by most insurance, and designed to be taken for life. Not to mention that they frequently give rise to nausea and loss of appetite. Giving them to every overweight American clearly isn't appropriate. They're saying it right from the get-go that not everyone should be on this. If there's a drug that can do that, by all means, study it, but really study it. Actually understand how it works before prescribing it for people just for losing weight and not for its currently known use of diabetes treatment. Now, I've had 3 relatives in my life who are diabetic, plus a friend's dad who's diabetic. And this is the first time I've ever heard of Ozempic. The first time I ever heard of Ozempic was probably the same as everyone else out there watching. Alright, let's see what it has to say about Trump. Take President Donald Trump. During his first term, a scan showed signs of plaque buildup in his coronary arteries, which put him at risk of a heart attack. In 2020, his BMI was just over the threshold for obesity. That combination would have made him a candidate for a GLP-1 drug. Indeed, throughout his 2024 campaign, people speculated that he was taking one. Then, last month, Trump's latest physical showed that he had dropped 20 pounds, moving him from obese to overweight. Trump has never publicly said that he is on a GLP-1, and when reached for comment, the White House did not address questions about how the president had lost the weight. Trump is in peak physical and mental condition, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt told The Atlantic in an emailed statement. I'm going to guess peak physical condition for a 78-year-old man. I mean, I will say this, he's a pretty sharp guy, the way that he strategically posts memes and such. He's not perfect, like the arbitrary tariff, tariff levying, but he seems to know what he's doing. The most revealing aspect of the president's medical report was the list of drugs he is taking, which includes a combination that amounts to what doctors call intensive lipid lowering therapy, a treatment usually reserved for patients who are at significant risk of cardiac disease. As far as the president's health is concerned, his weight is no more important than the fact that he is on that drug regimen and that it seems to be working. His LDL, the bad cholesterol, has dropped dramatically in recent years. Wait, isn't all this stuff supposed to be... Are presidents... Are elected officials, like... Do they lose the right to patient confidentiality? Because this all looks like stuff that should be confidential. I mean, I'm gonna guess that there's probably some choices that they're able to make on that. But when it comes to all this, I thought, wait, if a president has a therapist, does patient confidentiality still exist? Or because he's an elected official, he's not entitled to that privacy? If anyone knows how any of this works, you let me know in the comments down below. I'd like to think that elected officials are still entitled to some degree of privacy. But if there's a reason for this to be public record, I have to assume that there is a good reason for it, even if it's not one I would particularly agree with it. With. Okay, let's keep going. Trump's, Trump's example shows that doctors' and patients' primary goal should not be changes in weight alone, but changes in health. GLP-1 drugs can help a wide spectrum of people lose weight, but their risks are likely justified for only a smaller subset of Americans. To say whether the health benefits a person might gain from taking the drugs are worth the expense and likely gastrointestinal distress, physicians cannot rely on weight alone. Calculus can be life and death. Nearly 1,000 deaths a day are linked to diet related disease in the United States. To save lives and improve health, doctors, researchers, and politicians need to reckon with the true killer. Not weight or size, but particularly toxic kind of fat. What about the food dyes? When humans eat too many calories, especially too many of the highly processed, rapidly absorbed carbohydrates that are so common in the modern diet, fat accumulates around the waist, surrounding and invading the liver, heart, and pancreas. Doctors call it visceral, central, or abdominal fat. It's more dangerous to health than fat that accumulates in places such as the arms and thighs, because it leaks free fatty acids and other molecules into the body, generating inflammation, upending the metabolism, and wreaking havoc on our organs. Visceral fat is linked to cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, 13 types of cancer, and likely some forms of dementia, among other major chronic illnesses. Reduced visceral fat, and these conditions can be prevented or even in certain cases, treated. So basically, belly fat is the root of many of these health problems. Good to know. Hopefully, my protein pasta, hopefully over time by way of switching regular pasta with protein pasta and doing at least one time to walk on Apple Fitness Plus every morning, plus at least one other workout per day, or a second time to walk. I can definitely, we'll see what happens with that. This is about me reading and reacting to the article. I'll talk about my changes in health plans going forward in terms of managing my health personally. Visceral fat is closely tied to two hallmarks of metabolic disease: high insulin levels and insulin resistance. Scientists haven't yet determined which comes first, visceral fat or elevated insulin, but they know that high insulin levels are part of a vicious cycle that promotes fat storage, visceral fat, and disease, as elevated insulin has become dramatically more common. By 2018, more than 40% of Americans had high insulin. So too has chronic disease. 6 in 10 Americans have at least one chronic disease, and 4 in 10 have more. GLP-1 drugs are remarkably effective at reducing visceral fat. In fact, that may be a large part of why GLP-1s so improve the metabolic health of people who take them. The strongest case for use of GLP-1s, then, is in people who with excess visceral fat who have begun to suffer its consequences. The crucial problem for physicians is how to identify those people. BMI is a poor measure, but waist size is a good predictor of visceral fat, type 2 diabetes, and atherosclerosis. Do I even want to know what that is? You know what? Let's find out. Okay, according to the Cleveland Clinic, hardening of the arteries from plaque building up gradually inside them. I'm gonna guess that it's not like plaque that builds up on the teeth that the dentist says to brush to avoid the buildup of. Why am I doing this? I just want to show off my teeth a little. Huh. I just noticed they look a little yellow under the lighting. That's probably the lighting. My dental hygienist says I have very good teeth. Plus, teeth are actually supposed to be more of a shade of yellow than white. Anyway, apparently you may not have symptoms until you actually have the heart attack or stroke. All right, let's get back to the article before I start wondering if I might have this. Certain abnormalities in blood lipid patterns can indicate the beginning of organ dysfunction. Yet, the primary metric by which anti-obesity drugs are judged and distributed is weight. Originally, the FDA approved these medications for people with a BMI of 30 or above, or the BMI of at least 27, and at least one weight-related ailment. But the agency has since quietly removed its references to BMI from the drugs' labels, which now simply state the medications are for patients with obesity or those who are overweight in the presence of at least one weight related comorbid condition. Without explicitly saying so, this change recognizes that BMI is not a good measure of body fat. Excuse me. Nor of the visceral fat that causes the most harm. Yet the agency still requires that clinical trials of obesity drugs use BMI as a criterion for enrolling patients. When I go to the obesity medicine meetings, many of the physicians I speak with still use BMI as a guideline. You know, I actually looked up BMI. Apparently, it's based on height and weight. So there's actually a National Institute of Health BMI calculator. Here are the tables. So basically, your weight is I am so confused because it says find the appropriate height in the left hand column. Oh, wait, height is inches, and then your weight. So I guess this is the overweight section. So you can have a BMI of 35 if you're 58 inches tall or 5'8", and your weight is 167. You would have the same BMI as a 6 foot tall person who is 258 pounds compared to 167 pounds if you're 5'8". Table 2 is, well, it's just higher weight. It's just more weight. Like, does BMI not apply if you're 5'7" or below? I remember We Fit used to calculate your BMI for you. Yeah, obviously, you're going to be a little heavier if you're taller because there's just more of you already. There's more for the body to support compared to if you're shorter. It's like if you're 5'4", 5'3", you're going to not have as much of you to support. Fun fact, I heard that women are supposed to have a slightly higher body weight than men of the exact same height to account for things like childbirth and such. But the reason that most women are typically lighter than men is because they're generally shorter than men. Again, this is all generally speaking. Your specific instance may vary. Getting back to the article, over the past decade or so, awareness has grown among doctors and patients alike that BMI has limited utility as a health metric. It doesn't distinguish between muscle and fat. It doesn't account for how fat tends to be distributed differently on male and female bodies. These shortcomings are important when considering what a patient has to gain from a GLP-1 drug. People of South Asian heritage, for example, can develop insulin resistance at much lower BMIs than other populations. According to the American College of Cardiology, in terms of insulin resistance, a white person with a BMI of 30 can be metabolically equivalent to a South Asian person with a BMI of 23.9. Hold on, I want to take a quick look at the BMI thing on the website again. Okay, BMI of 30, that is 246 pounds if you're 76 inches tall or 6 foot. Hold on, 6 feet times 12. Yeah, 72 is 6 feet. So, assuming they're the same height, I don't know. This is starting to confuse me a little, so let's keep going with the article. Unfortunately, doctors do not have easy and reliable ways to measure insulin resistance directly. Developing a diagnostic test would go a long way in helping determine who should be treated with anti-obesity medications. The Tim Pools of the world would probably say the only people who should be treated with this are people who are obese by no fault of their own, because Yeah, you can make choices to that can lead to weight loss. Like me personally, I'm not advocating for anyone to go out of their way to lose weight. And I remember Review Tech USA shared his secret was to just make it a daily part of your life. You can't just make temporary changes until the weight goes down and then go back to the habits that got you there in the first place. So, for example, I have switched to making my own pizzas because I have to actually work for it now instead of just pulling it out of the freezer and throwing it in the toaster oven for a certain amount of time. I actually have to work for it. Same thing with all the sandwich buns I make. I have to work for it. Therefore, I will be having it less often because I would literally wear myself out or spend time I could spend playing video games or something. As I mentioned earlier, I switched out I am switching out regular pasta for protein pasta, and I'm adding a bowl of cooked vegetables as something to eat before I start on either my chicken sandwich slash burger or pizza. Still important to enjoy foods that you enjoy, but to be smart about it. Like with my cinnamon sugar popcorn, I have officially decided to go down to a tablespoon of sugar to cover the popcorn instead of the quarter cup that the back of the Target store brand kernels said to use because I found there was way too much of a pile of sugar at the bottom that didn't stick to the popcorn. I think there was even when I just straight up melted butter and then poured it right on instead of my usual thing. I think I've explained it before. But I digress. The United States is still deciding how exactly to approach GLP 1s. The Trump administration scrapped a Biden administration proposal to cover anti obesity medications under Medicare's Part D drug benefit, but it hasn't ruled out future coverage. Within the past year, the FDA has both expanded its eligibility guidelines for the drugs and declared that the drugs are no longer in shortage. That means that compounding pharmacies can no longer produce replicas of Novo Nordisk's Wegovy and Eli Lilly's Zepbound, which will reduce the availability of cheaper options, but might also curb the risks associated with copycats. Plus, Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly have recently introduced new discount programs. Early data suggests that the drugs may be useful in treating fatty liver disease, heart failure, possibly neurodegenerative diseases, which I suspect will lead even more people to take them. If GLP 1s really do become more common in America, everyone who goes on them needs to understand that they are doing so without an end game. GLP 1 drugs were approved under the premise that patients will stay on them for life. But so far, most people take them for less than a year, in large part because of their side effects, typically high cost and lack of insurance coverage. Scientists do not have good data on whether and how to get off the drugs without regaining weight, whether they can be used safely and effectively on an intermittent basis, or how to adjust doses downward over the long term. The best way to find those answers is for the FDA to require pharmaceutical companies to gather the data. Letting the companies off the hook by assuming that people are going to be on these drugs forever would be a grave mistake. All of these unanswered questions only add to the urgency of determining who is most likely to benefit from GLP-1s, and who would be safer or healthier by sticking with lifestyle changes and other medications. GLP-1 drugs are not a panacea. They are one powerful tool to help control America's crisis of metabolic disease, one that we need to get right. And then it talks about how the author served as commissioner of the FDA under H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. He core-led Operation Warp Speed under the Biden administration. Well, my opinion here is if insurance isn't going to cover it, it's probably for a good reason. The first choice, unfortunately, you're just going to have to make some lifestyle changes. I don't know what else to say. I am personally doing that myself, but at a certain point, you have to accept the consequences of your decisions or what you choose to do. And I think that's why in one of RFK's videos, I think it was the one where he talked about tartazine, he said something about how he wants to get those chemicals out of the food supply because it does contribute to gaining weight. So I'm not gonna go full Bo Refik by being like eat clean, eat whole foods, because that can be the cost barrier is definitely there. So I can understand it being prohibitively expensive in some ways, but there are some things you can do that aren't as costly, you know. Maybe get protein pasta instead of regular pasta, except that it's not going to be exactly like regular pasta, and you should be good to go. Or it's worth trying. I'm not trying to give health advice here because I am not a doctor. I am just saying what I am going to be giving a try because I can't really think of anything else to do. Yes, it's a 14 and a half ounce box of protein pasta costs double the price of a 16-ounce box of small elbow macaroni. But you know what? It's for a good cause. If it means I can if it means I can enjoy my sandwich buns and pizzas, both of which are homemade, on a regular basis, on the days between those, I can live with that. So you know what? I think I'm going to wrap it up here for the video. You let me know in the comments down below what you think about all this. Give this video a like, subscribe for daily videos, and I'll see you soon.